It's quite tricky to be the last one in such a long day, so I really appreciate you being here. I'll try to keep it brief so that we can all enjoy the last bit of sunshine. I'd like to talk about digital design. That word I only heard 2 years ago at a conference in London, and it struck me as an important word because when you have words around ideas, they become more tangible. And it basically represents what the things that happen when the physical world meets the digital, that hybrid, hard to define boundary in between. Archigram, how many of you have heard of Archigram? It's an amazing design and architecture collective from the 60s. I'd highly recommend reading their work. They are kind of the provocateurs in the architecture world because they say that architecture is a very interesting thing to talk about, but a terrible thing to do because it's slow, it's expensive, you can't iterate, etc. And the quote that they have that they are famous for is, when it rains in Oxford Street, the buildings are no more important than rain. So they actually nailed the core of experience design way before anyone talked about that. The facades that surround us and the people that think about those may think that they're doing the most important job, but an environmental factor can completely flip the way you experience the street. What is the analogy of this in the digital world? What are the facades and what is rain? When we surf the website, when we walk through the apps, work through the apps, I think that's worth thinking about. My background is in architecture and engineering, and then also in interaction design. And currently I'm head of design at Atelier, which is an innovation platform just behind here in the old historic beer factory. If anyone is interested later today, I'd be happy to take you over, or tomorrow, the place where we're going to all have beer is also adjacent to our space. What we mean by this is it's transdisciplinary because we believe that it's not only a few different disciplines working together, but people literally learning how to wear different hats. How can I start the project doing the basics of anthropology, then doing UX design, then also engaging with architecture, technology, and in communications? How can I become not a T-shaped person with one specialty, but perhaps a pie-shaped person or a comb shape where I develop multiple specialties? So there we have a community of about 100, 120 people, a curated community of members. We have our core team. And on the innovation front, we do a lot of case studies or projects that engage multiple disciplines, as well as enable collaborations among members. And on the platform side, it is the space. It's a space that almost becomes the body language of our culture. So this is the workspace for the members, the event space where we'll host a workshop tomorrow, and a maker lab for physical and digital prototyping. And the type of work we do spans all through the gamut of from strategy to design, technology, communications, and the way we map our community is also through an interactive network platform where we look at different skill sets that are in reach in physical space. And I think this is important for today. So 6 arguments I'd like to share is, this one I think is quite interesting. We always think of this canon of graphic design, and we say in graphic design you learn print and you learn digital. What if one were to state digital design is actually closer to architectural design than print? And the reason is we go to places in web. We meet friends, we buy books, we transfer money, we watch others. That sounds more like walking through spaces than it is through conveying information, right? So because of this, the theory and the history of architecture can actually tell us a lot about what we should do in digital worlds. And this is another interesting one. We have cathedrals, and these are the intranets and the Apples of the world. We have bazaars, and this is the Wikipedia and the Linux of the world. We have gates, and these are the firewalls. We have the wayfinding signs that surround us. Sometimes we lack them. These are the navigation bars. We have things under construction. Well, we also have things under construction. We hit the bumps on the road and get annoyed, and then we see bugs and get annoyed. So actually, the way we think of digital world has such a direct linguistic and practical correspondence that perhaps it's worthwhile to not look at only the screen as a design interface, but everything that surrounds it. But there is a great advantage of digital. It's easier to prototype, it's easier to test. So this is the obvious. So I'm going to skip through this quickly, but wireframes, user flows, web-based heat maps, analytics, all the stuff we talk about today, this makes digital so much easier to live with and change. In architecture, it's a pain. We make these abstract maps of how people ought to walk through this space. We make these plans that have no people in it. We have these simulations of lighting that actually may not reflect the reality, the complexity, and we have renders. And then these are the old-fashioned tests that people have done. In the 60s, William White had done literally public space head counts where he hired people that would make a dot on the corners to see how people behave. And they've also done a lot of post-occupancy surveys, handing out paper and trying to get feedback. So this is almost like before web happened, the mentality of the web was already there. But two things converging make a huge difference. One is virtual reality, and the other one is Internet of Things. And that creates the phygital. With the virtual reality, we block the world that's surrounding us, and we can lead people to immersive environments where we don't have to build from scratch, and the experience is very close to reality. So this is truly revolutionary, not only for architecture, but all the digital interfaces that surround us. What if you were to design a system of navigation in the space, reactive installations and everything before building it? That's really the core of when the phygital can be prototyped at ease. And augmented reality works well with existing spaces. What if I can put the furniture that I want to place here with a small marker, walk around it, modify it, and co-design it with others? And then these are actually, the one on the left looks eerily close to a website heat map because it is the same thing. So all these sensors make it possible to treat the real world as if we're doing web analytics. And there are a lot of companies emerging that take all these data and then try to make insights out of it. So as a result, architecture is not as static as it seems anymore. And this is an interesting case study from Australia done by Dan Hill about 8 years ago, where he realized that people sit in odd places in this library. And then he wondered why. Why is this person sitting in this awkward corner? And then the person replied, because Wi-Fi is the strongest. And that's amazing. Because then he said, I'm going to make a map of the Wi-Fi strength network in this space. So in a way, the architect has imagined the seating to be uniform, but the data infrastructure changes our behavior, and we do this every single day. We walk around so that our cell phones receive better, we walk around so that the Wi-Fi receives better, so there's this invisible pattern around us that also makes the space phygital even without sensors. And such explorations are really uncharted because sensors are just really becoming ubiquitous. Networks are becoming ever more strong. VR, people still don't know how to exactly use it in practical ways. So this is extremely interesting. Maybe it's not even worth sticking into that screen anymore. And this is one case study we've done. I'm going to go over it very briefly. It's a work in progress with a global brand where the insight was simple. The product is strong, but the wider product service system had so much opportunity. They knew really well how to sell the car, but from the first day of imagining how to buy the car, to going to the dealer, to doing the test drive, to getting the financing options, we realized it was a terrible, well, terrible is too strong, but it was just a lot of room for improvement. So then we mapped all these anxieties and disappointments. The first time seeing the car at the dealer, people get pressured. They want to do their own exploration as if they're in the web. And that's literally a quote from these people. We spend so much time researching in web that when we go to the retail stores, we want to feel like we're in a web environment. Seeing the car details with the salesman, it's confusing, the data is all verbal, we're used to seeing things and charts and comparisons. In physical spaces, these don't exist yet. The test drive is very boring. Someone tells me to turn right and left. We've done about 20 test drives ourselves as a team for immersion, and we realized it was far from inspirational. And then trade and appraisal quotation, just a lot of experiential problems. And then what we invented was the idea of a reverse test drive. What if, rather than me going to a dealer, waiting for the car, then getting a 15-minute time slot of a predefined route, I just tell the system, I'm going to go to my work just as usual, and then I want the car to be at my door at 8 a.m., and then I'm going to drive on my own or with a company, and then I'm going to experience it, and all this data will feed into the dealer so that they get insights about my preferences. Do I like really, do I care about acceleration? Do I care about comfort? Would I go to the highways? And then this, where the product becomes part of your daily experience. And this is only possible with the recent technologies that we have at hand. And then meanwhile, the whole system could also do a time lapse of your experience, which then is shared in Facebook, and also an artifact that's 3D printed to reflect this experience, perhaps mapping the route or some other factors. So this is very interesting because the car is already there, but all the equipment that it needs for making it smart is actually not about making it smart, it's making it sensitive. How does it fit into our own experience? And I'm going to skip over this, where we basically explored some physical spaces of negotiation, where it feels like people are sitting in the car, but they're in the store, and there are all sorts of digital screens that surround and augment information, and then some other studies. And then finally, two concepts. One is scalar thinking, and the other one is shearing layers. They are very worthwhile in helping frame the conversation. A great designer, Saarinen, says, always design a thing by considering it in its next larger context. A chair in a room, room in a house, house in an environment, environment in a city plan. So the idea of adjacency is crucial. Then it's worth asking, what is this screen that I'm designing within adjacent to? What is the furniture it's sitting on? What is the screen it's rendered in? What is the daily flow of that person before and after that screen? And then these are actually in friction. So Stuart Brand established this diagram in the 90s, where he said, this is basically everything around us is changing. That's the only constant. The geology is changing, only maybe every 10,000 years. The structure is changing. It gets old in about 30, 40, 50 years. The facade in 20 years. The furniture in 5 years. The air conditioning system in 10 years. So, and they create friction because they don't change at the same rate. You have to keep maintaining them in different ways. So in our context, maybe to redefine this, we have the space changing and the furniture changing, and then there's the technology that changes. How many times have we cursed into this tablet that's not iPad or anything, and it's just becoming outdated in a few years, and then it's a liability. The phone booths that were all around the cities become liabilities because with cell phones they become redundant. And then the most crucially, the content. The content changes so fast today that if you rely on the technology hardware to support it, then you're out of luck. The best technology that we end up having is just the cell phone that we carry in our hands. The best sensor, the best actuator, the best augmentation device. So perhaps an adaptation of the shearing layers would be where the digital world is almost this tale of a screen that's coming ever closer to us. We started with big screens, then we got the computers, then we got the tablets, then the phone, then the watch. We're working with glass, it doesn't seem to work out that well, and then the lens is inevitable. This is the ultimate purpose of technology, is to shrink the digital into the closest area that it can. So it's interesting to think about the frictions in between these. What is the friction between the tablet and the phone? What is the friction between the glass and the computer? This creates very interesting UX challenges. And then there is the obvious spatial friction. What is the friction between the furniture and the room it stays in? Does the furniture stay much longer? Do I take the furniture? Do I tear down the room? What is the friction between the street and the object? I put the sensor, and the sensor gets old, the street is there, what happens? And then finally, the relationship of, am I collecting all this data from the tablet that sits in a room, and do I share it just with myself? Is it a quantified self? Do I share it with my friends? Is it a friend circle? Is the data owned by people I know? Or is it public? So in a way, perhaps this creates a way to codify what's beyond experience. Because experience is basically every single intersection in this matrix. But then what's important is not only that experience, but all the adjacencies around it that makes the exploration more interesting. I know this has been maybe a bit abstract, but I feel that architecture and UX design actually have so much in common, and there's a lot of theory that goes in architecture maybe for 2,000–3,000 years. There's a lot of written stuff, whereas UX design as an academic area is 20, maybe at most 40 years old. So my case is that even if you don't practice architecture, and perhaps it's even not a good idea to practice architecture, we also realize as our design studio that architecture on its own is far from enough in making the real impact. It is still interesting to look at this literature from another lens and see how it can influence us in our daily practice. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate you staying through. And if anyone is interested, I'm happy to give a tour today or tomorrow, and we'll also host a workshop tomorrow where we explore such digital interventions for Bomontia, the courtyard, with the Bomontia, the stakeholders coming as the jury to evaluate the designs. Thank you.